So now I've taken the front of the headstock down to the correct thickness, and I've routed the truss rod channel and gone through for the Allen key. Now on the template there's a curve there, which is normally done on a spindle sander, but I don't have a spindle sander. So instead what I'm going to do is cut out a piece of purple heart, a nice triangle, and fit it there, which will reinforce the headstock and be a nice purple heart motif while still being within the bounds of the tuners. So I cut out a triangle of purple heart and I glued it on to the face of the headstock and also onto the end of the fretboard, the purple heart here, and that will nicely reinforce the neck and also be a nice purple heart motif. So now I've glued on the triangle of purple heart onto the front of the headstock, and now the thing is to route the truss rod access. So now I've routed through the purple heart. Just have to clean that up with a chisel, but that's looking good. This is my jigsaw table, which I'm using to cut most of the excess off the neck and the body, and this is the guide for the blade, and we'll see if it works. So now I've trimmed down the excess from the side of the neck using the jigsaw. Worked reasonably well, but yeah, get a bandsaw if you can. And now the next thing is to flush trim it to the template using the router. The next thing to do is to rough cut the headstock. Now I'm doing a 4x2 headstock because it's not long enough to do a 6-inch line. So I have to have that line and that line to there, so it doesn't leave me much in the way of options. So I've drawn these 3 lines to see which I prefer, but as it turns out I like all of them, so I'm now going to do a kind of fan stepped headstock. So yeah, making life hard for myself. So now I've rough trimmed the headstock on the jigsaw table, and the next step is now to get it to the line with the jigsaw, not the jigsaw. This is my setup for routing the neck to shape. So I have the template sitting on the neck. I've got an equal thickness the other side for the router to run on, and I'm going to route for close to the body for the time being. So I've now routed the edge of the neck using the router and the template, and it's worked very nicely. Done one side of the headstock, because of course I'm going to do a 4x2, so I'm going to flip this over and do the other side. I was overly ambitious here and got some really nasty tear out, but fortunately that's outside the size of the body, so I'm going to cut that off with a saw and not try that again until I've got the wings glued on, so that should reduce the risk of chip out. But it's starting to look very much like a guitar. So I've now flush trimmed the neck template right up to the point where it joins the body, and it's left a very nice surface. Use the trimmed router bit for that, and that works very nicely. So the next stage is to drill the 4 tuner holes on the left hand side of the headstock before I flip the template round to do the other side of the headstock, and then drill the 2 tuner holes on that side. This is my pillar drill. This is an ancient 40-year-old Black & Decker drill with the pillar drill attachment they were selling a long time ago. And it sticks a bit on the action, but it does drill nice and straight. So I've now flush trimmed the headstock by flipping over the template and doing the first 2 tuners on this side to give me the 6 tuners. Now for the rest of the headstock, I've decided to do a kind of 2 curves that meet. Handily, the upper horn of the Strat template had the perfect curve to do these curves onto the headstock here. So I've copied it onto a bit of MDF. I'm going to use the superglue masking tape trick to stick it down, and then I'm going to route along the lines and then move it back and do it again, and then move it back and do it again. So this is my setup to route the headstock. So I've got the MDF masking tape and super glued onto the headstock to give me the shape. I've got the maple and the purple heart, which is in the same height as that, to rest the router on the other side. So it should just be the matter of routing that off. This is where it's starting to get slightly tricky. Because my bearing cutter cuts 25mm, in order to cut to the depth I want, I've had to stack 12mm MDF underneath the template here. So it then should cut to the height I want here, and hopefully it's not getting too high and precarious. So I've put various bits of wood and MDF this side to get the same height as that, and hopefully that's going to cut what we want. So I managed to do the first fan, but it was getting a bit silly, the amount of hand to stack up on top of here to do the third one, so the second one even. So I think we're just going to leave it at that, and that looked quite interesting. And it's starting to get a bit of chip out as well, so I'll just round this off a touch. But that's looking good. Before I put the fretboard on, I'm now going to route out the pickup cavities. But because I've deviated quite significantly from the Strat template I've got, and I'm going to do 3 single coils, but they're going to be straight across and they're going to be closer because I'm using a 24 fret neck. I'm going to copy the pickup template onto a bit of MDF, which I can then use as my template to route them exactly where I want them. And I'm going to do that on my pillar drill using this, what a spade bit I think they call them. And then I'm going to trim it using flush trim it using the router once I've done that. This is my rig to copy the pickup shape onto a bit of MDF. So I've got the MDF clamp between the workbench, and I've got the template on top of it. Now, because I'm not doing the channels in between, I've done the tops and sides, but left that bit. So now I'm going to move it onto this one to get this line here. So now I've moved it to the bridge pickup template, which interestingly is wider on the shoulders, but never mind. This is the bit I'm after here, and I've lined this up as best I can. I'm just going to clean that up there. And there we have it, a nice pickup template. Looking good. So now I'm making a clamping call for the fretboard. So I've traced the radius of the fretboard onto the end of this, well, the other end. And then I'm going to use a ball nose bit to route out the channel, then move the router and raise it to the radius and do it again until I've got the nice dished curve, which I can then use as a clamping call. So now I've got a close approximation of the radius of the fretboard. It's a smidgen rough, but I'm going to wrap the fretboard in sandpaper and then sand that down so it's nice and smooth, and that will give me a good clamping call. So I've finished making my clamping call, and I've added some padding so the fretboard doesn't get damaged as it's clamped on. So that's looking quite good. The next step is to make the holes for the pickups. So I've marked those out, and I'm going to use a big drill bit to hog out the most of the material. Annoyingly, when I put the template on the neck, I didn't quite get it lined up, and I thought I'd just check the centre line again, and as it turned out I was about a mil out, so I've had to redraw my centre line. But everything's still in line, so that's not an issue. So now I'm going to use the pillar drill to hog out most of the wood before I switch to the router to finish the shape of the pickup templates. So now I've hogged out most of the wood from the pickup cavities. I think I'll see if I can get the bigger chunks that are left out with the chisel before I route the rest of it, because the router does not like taking off large amounts of wood. So I've now hogged out most of the material for the pickup cavities, but I'm not going to route them until I've got the wings on, otherwise I suspect I'm going to get a lot of chip out at the corners. What I am going to do is make a hole for the pickup cables. Now, I was originally intending to route a channel along the side here, which would have been a very neat way of doing it, but the neck pickup I've bought has a slightly short cable. So what I'm going to do instead, I've got this long drill bit, and I'm going to drill through to there, which I've just got the angle to do, and that will work very nicely. So now I've drilled that hole through the cavities so the cables can go straight down, and once I put the wings on, I'll drill another hole through there into the control cavity, and that's worked very nicely.